Well, I'm truly excited to kick off this symposium. Our program is truly a collaboration between graduate students, staff, and faculty at Boston University, and partners in government, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector, many of whom you'll hear from today. We all have a shared goal of tackling urban environmental challenges using knowledge formed from sound science. So for today's agenda, we'll start with a brief overview of the program and words about our participating departments. We'll hear keynote addresses from Kim Barrett and Daniel Denecke from the National Science Foundation. You'll hear from our graduate students about projects they've worked on and ideas they propose. Then we'll have a panel discussion with people from government, NGOs, and the private sector speaking about tackling urban environmental challenges. We'll also have short breakout discussions, and we'll close the symposium together at 1:05. So the goal of today's symposium is to share our program with all of you and to invite you to join in our efforts. We welcome your ideas to expand upon our existing plans, and if you see a project in which you're interested in collaborating on, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. To help minimize Zoom fatigue, we're asking all of our speakers to please keep to our scheduled time. Please keep your chat boxes open, and we'll remind you if you're approaching the end of your allotted time. Next slide, please. So once again, my name is Pamela Tendler. My email address is here below, and you're all welcome to reach out to me with any questions, concerns, or ideas for collaboration. You're also welcome to reach out to all of our speakers. So now I'm going to give a brief overview of our program. Next slide, please. Our program was initiated with the National Science Foundation Research Traineeship, or NRT grant. The NRT program was launched by the National Science Foundation in 2014 and provides 5-year, $3 million grants for new graduate programs that integrate interdisciplinary research with graduate training and those that aim to broaden participation in STEM education. Our NRT program began at Boston University in 2017 with support from both the National Science Foundation and more recently Boston University. We now have 2 cohorts of graduate students shown here, and we're in the process of admitting our 3rd cohort now. Next slide, please. You might ask, why create a program like this? Well, we call our program Urban, or the Boston University Graduate Program in Urban Biogeoscience and Environmental Health. So why create this? Well, we all know that cities face numerous environmental challenges related to climate, water, air, and land use change in an increasingly urbanized world. We need to bring together disciplines to tackle these urban environmental challenges. The importance of engaging with cities, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector. At the same time, we know that graduate students crave both the basic fundamental understanding of science as well as solution-oriented training. And so in our program, we're using cities as a living laboratory for their training. Next slide, please. Our program centers on multiple departments at Boston University, including the Departments of Biology and Earth and Environment within our Biogeoscience program, the Department of Environmental Health in the School of Public Health, and the program in Statistics in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. In case you're not familiar with it, biogeoscience is a study of how humans impact the Earth's atmosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and geosphere. And environmental health rounds out the circle by looking at how those changes in the environment in turn affect human health. Our NRT program works at the intersection of all 3 of these fields in tackling urban environmental challenges related to air, water, and climate. PhD students in our program are trained in how to apply fundamental science and tools of participating disciplines to address urban environmental challenges, including air and water pollution, and extreme weather events such as severe heat waves and storm surges hitting many towns and cities across the US and beyond. Next slide, please. Our students are trained through a variety of workshops such as city governance, which is done in collaboration with Boston University's Initiative on Cities. Students are trained in science communication through both staff at the Institute of Sustainable Energy and WBUR, Boston's NPR station. Students also gain professional development skills through the Boston University's BEST office. Next slide, please. Students work in partnership with people in the private sector, city governments, and non-governmental organizations, next slide, with research questions formulated using a collaborative process. And they do this through training with partners in multiple ways. Next slide, please. Students work with our partners in projects that they develop through our Applied Research Methods course, which you'll hear about soon from our students. They also undertake internships with our partners. Some of this works get embedded into their dissertation research, and many of our students share their work, both their completed work, ongoing work, as well as proposed ideas at annual symposia like the one you're all participating in today. Next slide, please. Over the last 2 years, our PhD students have worked with a variety of partners shown here in government, non-governmental organizations, as well as the private sector. And these partnerships continue. Next slide, please. This summer's partnerships will be carried out with a variety of organizations, and I include 4 here. Jessica Wright will work with the City of Cambridge City Council. Raquel Jimenez will work with Speak for the Trees in Boston. Kate Connolly will work with Energize Andover, and Taylor Adams will work with Quantac. Next slide, please. We're very fortunate to have a vibrant community of faculty and staff at Boston University who support our students and work collaboratively with them. They span multiple departments, programs, offices, and colleges across the university. Next slide, please. We're also fortunate in that we have an engaged external advisory board who provide us with feedback about our current practices and push us to think beyond our own graduate program. And these include Bud Reese, Steve Hamburg, Diane Pataki, Kathy Fallon-Lambert, Carl Spector, and Brian Sweat, and we appreciate all of the support and help we get from them. Next slide, please. We also have a professional evaluation team who work with us in an ongoing manner with the goal of constantly improving the program. Next slide, please. And because we feel so fortunate to have all of these wonderful students, faculty, staff, and partners, both on and off campus, we have many different activities and events throughout the year, and I'll just highlight a few here. Trainees attend city government meetings in downtown Boston, Cambridge, and other local cities. Trainees meet with city councilors, including Michelle Wu from Boston and Quentin Zondervan from Cambridge, who you'll hear from later during our panel. We have events where students share their research ideas in creative ways, such as on the right, where they build their field sites using graham crackers and candy and then explain their work. Trainees also meet regularly with Boston University faculty and staff in courses and seminars. Next slide, please. So now I'm happy to pass the baton. I'll introduce you to the 3 faculty who will share with you our 3 main participating programs. Lucy Hutira will speak first about our biogeoscience program, which includes faculty and students from biology and earth and environment. John Levy will share with you the Department of Environmental Health, and Eric Kolacek will talk with you about mathematics and statistics. Next slide, please. All right, Lucy, take it away.
Great, thank you very much, Pam. Next slide. So our biogeoscience program has been around for about a decade, maybe 11 years. It predates the NRT, and a lot of what we're doing in the NRT was piloted in some ways through biogeosciences. So as Pam mentioned, biogeosciences is the study of the processes in and the interactions among the Earth's atmosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and geosphere. And that's a bit of a mouthful, but it really focuses on 2 main areas: biogeophysics, which is the movement of water, mass, and energy, and then biogeochemistry, which has to do with the cycling of elements. Next slide. In the biogeoscience program, we have a wide array of faculty with expertise in different areas like ecosystem science, biogeochemistry, microbial ecology, hydrology, and remote sensing. There are several hallmark elements to this program, including professional development, which I won't go into now. And then there's a practicum and colloquium piece to this, where the students get a chance to interact closely with a faculty member in the colloquium and read papers, discuss papers, and meet some of the leading people in the field who come for seminars. And in the practicum element, the students work in a small group atmosphere and they tackle a specific problem, starting from end to end and including either, every year is a bit different, something from deploying instruments to big data analytics. And I was fortunate enough to teach these 2 courses last year. And so I'll give you an example of what we did in 2020, which focused on a long record. The photo that's here is the Eddyflux Tower, which measures carbon and water exchange from a forest. And this is located at the Harvard Forest in central Massachusetts. This tower is the longest running tower of this type. It has 20 years of data at a 30-minute time interval from dozens of different sensors. So what we did as a class is we looked at all of that data. We started out with the theory and models that we think that we understand from this, and we kind of took a long-term perspective to try to reanalyze some of this. Next slide. And what was really fun is we reparameterized models to estimate some key things. So what's plotted here is ecosystem respiration, so the rate at which the forest is releasing carbon dioxide through decomposition processes, and then net ecosystem exchange, the balance between the release of CO2 and the uptake of CO2. And the students came up with a whole new model to try to estimate this. So their model's shown with the colored bands around it versus the classic one. It was a really fun, big data sort of exercise this year. Next slide. Next slide. We also do a lot of work through biogeosciences wherein we engage in the community. And that's similar in some of the themes to what we are trying to do in urban. These are two examples from 2019. These happen to have an urban theme, but many of the workshops and community efforts don't. One thing that we did last year is we ran two workshops, one that was focused on CO2 and one that was focused on sustainable urban systems. Next slide. We also have a focus on communication and application of our science results. This slide that's shown here is from Joy Winburn's work. This involved a number of different faculty and students from across this program. And it was trying to think about what having trees in our environment does for temperatures and what it might, and how trees might respond to increasing temperatures. And so in this example is thinking about what happens during heat waves and what might happen to the temperature and how will the trees mediate that. Next slide. Wherein the trees could either have a positive or a negative effect on what the temperatures look like, depending on if they stop moving water and cooling the environment. So these are a couple of examples of what we do in the biogeosciences program. These examples were from what we've done in the last year. Next year, Jenny Batnagar from the biology department will be teaching the two courses, the hallmark courses with this, and she is a microbial ecologist. So rather than a focus on CO2, I'm imagining that there might be a bit more on microbial ecology and soil ecology in next year's courses, which makes it really fun to have a shared model where different perspectives are brought out. And our students actually take the courses multiple times if they'd like to get that breadth from across the faculty. That's all. John Levy from Environmental Health.
Thanks. Yep, I've got it. Good morning, everyone. So I just want to introduce you briefly to some of the activities in environmental health, which sits at the School of Public Health. Next slide. So we are roughly 20 faculty spanning a number of disciplines that come back toward environmental health. As you can see from the top, we have through our tagline, we have a strong community focus. So we engage in a lot of community engaged research, field-based activities, modeling efforts that are meant to inform decision-making, not solely at the city scale, but certainly with a lot of efforts at the city scale, as well as nationally and globally. And you can also see next to our tagline, we have an array of degree programs, including very close involvement with the urban program, a number of faculty as well as students, as well as PhD, MPH, and a newly launched MS focusing specifically on climate and health. In terms of our research efforts, again, it spans many disciplines. I have a few just example projects below that I think touch most closely on the efforts within urban. So Ascent is a project looking at the effects of aviation on air quality in communities close to airports, as well as noise, and understanding some of the cardiovascular health effects. The Community Noise Lab is a sort of community-based, community engaged research activity looking specifically at noise in a variety of different contexts. And probably the most wide-ranging effort we have is CRESH, which is our Environmental Health Disparities Research Center, which has engaged very closely with a number of community partners, including Children's Health Watch, which looks at very young children across cities around the US, and we have a very tight focus on communities in and around the Boston area with partnerships in Chelsea, Dorchester, and elsewhere in Massachusetts. I'd sort of be remiss if I didn't point out that in this moment of COVID-19, where there's obviously been a heightened emphasis on public health and a strong emphasis on Chelsea, we have engaged in doing a lot of data analyses as well as on-the-ground efforts in partnership with our colleagues in Chelsea. So trying to take some of our remote sensing and other analytical capacity and apply those to the current situation to understand vulnerability factors and so forth. So again, just a snapshot. I think last I checked, we had perhaps 70 research grants in the department. This again is just a smattering of those. Next slide. So as mentioned, we have a lot of projects with strong engagements. Chelsea, I mentioned, Boston and New Bedford are other communities that we've been working closely, and most of these partnerships have spanned about a decade or two, and so we have strong connections with both the city agencies themselves and with community-based organizations. And in a lot of our coursework, we involve the communities in those efforts, having community-driven projects in our exposure assessment course, as well as a specific class on community-based research methods. And I'll stop there.
Hi, good morning. I'm Eric Kalachik. I'm in Department of Mathematics and Statistics. I'm also director of our Hariri Institute for Computing, which is BU's Institute for Computing and Data Science on campus. Next slide, please. So it's been a delight to be a part of Urban. We are a department of both mathematics and statistics, which is perhaps more rare in the US landscape. That means that within that department, we have expertise ranging from dynamical systems through to probability and statistics. The statistics in particular is roughly the size of a regular department, but it's highly integrated with both mathematics and more generally with a great many departments across the university. And we integrate with this particular program, both in terms of our PhD students who obtain their training and also some of our master's students with this MSSP program on the right-hand side here, where the master's students end up helping provide support for some of the data analytic efforts that are brought to us through our consulting program. So we have a variety of, whoops, did this slide switch or is this the next one? There we go, yeah. So the collaborations that we have here these are ones that I'm listing particularly at the PhD level, right? So they involve land cover classification and biomass estimation from data from MODIS, more recently Landsat. They involve modeling of urban crime, particularly identification of hotspots. More recently, we've been looking at causal modeling of asthma outcomes and environmental exposure and social stressors, both particularly controlling for medications. And with Lucy, for example, we've recently been looking at implications of solar-induced fluorescence on photosynthesis. So the range of problems that are being addressed here are only limited by the richness of the urban landscape. The core thing that we try and provide here is statistical infrastructure, advice, feedback, and what's fascinating for us is that in many cases, for example, with the causal modeling problem there, what is cutting edge in terms of urban research is also cutting edge in terms of statistical research. The size of the data that we have there is large, and it begins pushing the research boundaries within statistics on causal modeling. We can go to the next slide, please. Whoops, that was it. Okay, so we'll just stop there then. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'd like to thank Lucy, John, and Eric for those great overviews of our participating programs. Now we're going to turn to our keynote address to be given by Kim Barrett and Daniel Denecke at the National Science Foundation. Evan, could you please turn off the slide deck? So I'll introduce our two speakers. Kim Barrett served as Distinguished Professor of Medicine and Dean of the Graduate Division at the University of California, San Diego. She was also President of the American Physiological Society, She's currently editor-in-chief for the Journal of Physiology and serves on multiple editorial boards, and is currently division director for the National Science Foundation's Division of Graduate Education. Daniel Denecke is a lecturer at the University of Maryland College Park and Georgetown University, and he's currently the program director of the NRT program in the Division of Graduate Education at NSF. So I'll turn it over to you, Kim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela, and it's really an honor to have the opportunity to join you and just say a few words to the members and supporters of your urban program. With your focus on melding biogeoscience, public health, and in-depth analysis of data, along with your authentic efforts to engage with policymakers and the community, you really exemplify exactly what was intended when the NRT program was established. The world's most vexing problems clearly need STEM professionals who can work across disciplines, communicate using different languages of those different disciplines, and deploy real-world skills such as teamwork and communication. And I'm really confident that important new approaches to the environmental problems facing cities will continue to emerge from the work that you're pursuing. I was asked to speak this morning about NSF's response to the current COVID-19 crisis. The most important message I can bring you is that we are still at work and we are delivering on our mission. And even though, since this was a symposium about cities, I put my hometown in the background of my Zoom. I'm actually in Alexandria, Virginia, working from my rotator apartment, and we're all still working pretty hard. We are on 100% telework status, and sometimes that means for some inefficiencies, but everybody is working hard, and perhaps even harder than normal. It certainly feels that way, and I'm sure you can all sympathize. Just this week, my colleagues are running 6 virtual second-round panels to select the new NRT awardees. And in fact, Dr. Denecke has actually stepped away from his panel for just a few minutes to be with us this morning. In addition to these operational pivots, NSF has moved very quickly to support urgent research to uncover the causes and impacts of the pandemic with rapid awards. And many hundreds of these awards have been made in just weeks with receipt of funds from Congress in the form of the CARES Act. So for example, in DGE, we have a number of projects, including one that is convening faculty, students, and institutions to identify and share best practices for continuing graduate education in the setting of a crisis like this. And we're also supporting studies of graduate student mental health and responses to stress, which was a national problem before all this happened, but has certainly, we think, probably been exacerbated. As an agency, we're actively discussing what our PIs, students, and institutions will need to recover from the crisis, and that's occurring both at the level of our Directorate of Education and Human Resources and the agency overall. The details really remain to be decided upon finally and released, but at this stage I can tell you that our strategies really fall into 2 buckets. The first, ensuring at a time of great uncertainty that we continue support of the people who are needed for the STEM enterprise to succeed. And secondly, we want to maximize the return on investments already made while seizing opportunities to capitalize on the new normal and to develop the infrastructure for ever more effective STEM research and education at all levels. I think there's a lot that we can learn from this current situation, and just the massive switch to online instruction, for example, which I don't know about BU, but certainly at my institution, it was a heavy lift to persuade faculty that this was an appropriate way of doing things. And of course, everyone's had to turn on a dime and do it overnight. So I think there are things that we can learn about how to do that most effectively. Moving forward, our Division of Graduate Education intends to focus even more aggressively on promoting student-centered graduate education that empowers trainees to succeed in the full range of career opportunities that are available to them, just as you're doing within the urban NRT. We also plan to support pilots of innovative approaches to graduate education prior to their broader dissemination, and to promote the adoption of the most promising practices. An equally important focus for the division, and certainly for me personally, is to champion strategies that broaden participation in STEM graduate education, and to ensure that the STEM enterprise can benefit from diverse viewpoints that will ultimately deliver more robust solutions to interdisciplinary problems. So with those few opening remarks, I'm really honored to have had the opportunity to share some time with you today. I'm hoping to stay at least through the panel discussion. And it's my pleasure to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Daniel Denecke. So I don't see him on my screen, so I hope he's there somewhere.
Thank you, Kim, so much. Daniel, are you here?
I'm here, and the host just unmuted me. So I'm hoping you all can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. So thank you, Kim, and thanks to Pam and the organizers of this event for the invitation to say a few words from a program officer's perspective. I know that circumstances are such that you weren't able to visit DC this year for one of the planned events that you had. I think you've adapted successfully, but looking forward to seeing whatever shape that event has taken or will take in the future. I'm really fortunate to have joined an amazing team of program directors and staff at NSF. Just 3 months ago, that University of Maryland position you mentioned is deep in my past. Since then, I've been doing a number of things, including a role at the Council of Graduate Schools for about 15 years, helping to develop best practice projects across graduate education, and working at NSF upstairs, I say, at the Convergence Accelerator, which is an exciting new initiative that has a lot of complementarity to the NRT program. So this week, as Kim mentioned, the NRT staff are hard at work convening panels and reviewing proposals for our next round of awards. We expect a new cohort of institutions to join you all of about 14 or 15 awards. As an NRT program, you are part of an amazing team as well, not only at Boston University, but nationwide. So to date, NRT has funded about 85 projects through 91 awards. Those projects represent 36 states and 1 territory. The awardee institutions have about a little under 10% of minority serving institutions, 21% of Research One university or non-Research One universities. And we have some diversity among our awardee PIs, but we'd like to see more. We have 34% of the PIs are female and 9% are underrepresented minority. So I'd just like to say a few words about the NRT and the importance of the work you're doing in the context of the program as a whole. You're part of the nation's cutting edge of innovation in STEM, graduate education, and research. And it was really nice to hear the point about the specific project that you're working on being not only cutting edge in the context of convergence and addressing societal needs, but that very topic, pushing forward cutting edge research and statistics. One of the ways we stimulate transformations in graduate education is by leveraging NSF's 10 big ideas as priority areas. This is to prepare a pool of talent and solutions at the frontiers of knowledge and to meet some of society's most pressing challenges. Some of those big ideas include quantum leap, harnessing the data revolution, and navigating the new Arctic. All of the NSF science directorates work closely with us in the Division of Graduate Education to ensure the rigor of research. The NRT, like its predecessor program, the IGERT, tackles some of the biggest challenges in graduate education as well. And especially here is the narrowness of focus in so many of our STEM PhD programs on preparation for academic careers and the narrow focus on one discipline in research masters and PhD programs. So the problem isn't just a matter of academic jobs being too scarce or not necessarily desired by many of our PhD students, but the fact that the PhDs also tend to be forged in disciplinary silos. So we know disciplinary expertise is a hallmark of a PhD, but we also know that this can end up disadvantaging our PhD candidates when they enter the workforce especially when they're asked to work in interdisciplinary contexts and in the kinds of contexts that you're preparing your doctoral candidates to enter. The BU Urban program reflects all three of the key traineeship elements of the NRT, and that's inclusiveness, and inclusive workforce development, and institutional transformation. Your program to help us plan for sustainable cities has all of these elements and paves clear pathways to academia, government agencies, NGOs, and the private sector. In each of these areas, much of the work that we need to do as a nation is just beginning, and we're really going to have to work together, continue to work together to radically rethink the limiting effects of our silos. Those are silos of knowledge, of epistemologies, of scientist identity formation, and funding structures. Your program is also commendable and somewhat unique in the strong policy focus. So as you all know, the broad training you're receiving across science, management, policy, communication, and governance will serve you and the science you represent well. The ability to communicate with policymakers and the public is a crucial skill if your research is to have the impact that it deserves. So your project recognizes this important work well. I wish I could stay with you for more of the day's discussions, but I do have to head back to these panels. And I really want to conclude by just wishing you all a very successful symposium.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Why don't we all just give a quick virtual clap for Kim and Daniel. Thank you so much. Daniel, I know you have to get back to the panel, but I just want to publicly thank you and Kim, because many of you on this call know that our program was supposed to go to Washington, D.C. in March. We were on the fence about going, and then right as everything shut down, we had no choice. But many of the meetings went virtual that week, which was pretty amazing. And we are not canceling, we're postponing that trip. So Daniel and Kim, we look forward to meeting you in person, and really thank you for all of your support and your optimistic words about NSF and science and our workforce coming together to help solve societal problems together. That's a big inspiration. So thank you. So Evan, if you could please turn the slide deck back on. I'm excited to introduce in this next section, you're going to get to hear from our students, our trainees. Our first two trainees, David Reynolds and Anita Tendler, are going to talk about their internships. I'll introduce them. So David Reynolds is a PhD student in statistics, and Anita Tendler is a PhD student in the Department of Earth and Environment. So David, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm David Reynolds. As Pam said, I come from the Department of Math and Statistics, where I'm a fourth-year PhD student. So I did my internship this past winter with a company called BioBot Analytics in a project that was related to estimating opioid usage from sewage. Next slide. So BioBot is a startup company that's based in Somerville, and they're engaged in wastewater epidemiology. So what that is illustrated on this slide. So starting from the top left, we have some illicit drugs that are consumed by people and excreted through toilets into the sewage system, where BioBot collects samples of wastewater and produces data. And BioBot data consists of counts of analytes that can be uniquely associated with various illicit drugs. And from this data, BioBot can do some interesting things like estimate drug consumption for different parts of a city and for different drugs. So the charts on the bottom are for illustration only. They don't represent any particular city, but they show that for two different parts of a city, BioBot can estimate consumption of drugs like fentanyl, heroin, and morphine. And the purpose of my internship was to quantify the uncertainty of these estimates by placing them within a Bayesian hierarchical modeling framework. And so essentially what this does is it allows us to attach error bars to the estimates. And this is important because the city leaders who consume this data, one of the principal things that they're interested in is whether there are significant differences for a particular part of the city in the consumption habits of a drug. So in this illustration, you can see that for fentanyl and morphine, if you look at the point estimates only, it looks like they're different, but with error bars, you can see that they're essentially the same. but maybe there's a heroin problem in downtown. Next slide. So currently, I'm working on a new project with BioBot where instead of measuring analytes associated with illicit drugs and sewage, BioBot, in conjunction with the MIT Alm Lab, is enumerating the presence of the coronavirus in wastewater treatment plants. And in a similar manner, they're able to take this data and estimate the prevalence of COVID-19 for various catchments associated with the plants. And so this project is very similar, and we're trying to estimate the uncertainty of this estimation. So I'd just like to conclude by saying thank you so much to BioBot for giving me the opportunity to work on these projects, and look forward to hearing from Nusha, the president and co-founder, in 20 minutes.
Thank you, David. Anita.
Hello, so my name's Anita. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Department of Earth and Environment. And this semester and going into the summer, I've been working with Cadmus to develop a greenhouse gas inventory for an upstate New York municipality, Tompkins County, which also happened to be my home for 4 years. So to back things up a bit, greenhouse gases are the driving force of climate change, and to mitigate their contribution to climate change, institutions seek to reduce their emissions. To keep track of their progress towards emissions reduction, these institutions develop greenhouse gas inventories. Next slide. These inventories are an accounting mechanism for tracking emissions from each sector. So you would account for emissions generated from the electricity grid, transportation, solid waste, or landfills. And lastly, in the case of upstate New York, you account for emissions associated with agriculture. Next slide. Tompkins County legislation has adopted a goal of reducing their emissions in the community by at least 80% from 2008 levels by 2050. Their first milestone is to achieve 20% reduction by 2020, making this year's report quite important. Ideally, through this accounting mechanism, you can produce a chart like this. Next slide. Where you break down by sector where emissions are coming from and target future policy to mitigate these emissions. For instance, in this chart from the Tompkins County 2014 report, the commercial sector accounted for 35% of total emissions in the county. Therefore, policymakers can generate an incentivizing means to transition the commercial sector to clean energy. For my internship, I am working with Cadmus to develop a 2019 greenhouse gas inventory, adjusting the methodology to meet the best available science. And I'd like to give thanks to Kate Mueller and Michael Walsh at Cadmus for extending this opportunity to me, and thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anita. I'd like to just mention that I invite all of you to use the chat box to ask questions of our students in advance of our discussion that will be following the next seven students. So these questions can be about Anita and David's internships or the following 7 students. So now you're going to hear from the 7 students who are listed here. All of these students participated in our Urban Applied Research Methods course this spring. They learned about multiple methods and approaches from more senior graduate students, postdocs, faculty, staff, and other visitors. And they use these lessons to work throughout the semester, developing and refining their project ideas. As I said, after this section, we're going to have time for discussion. And this is where we welcome all of you to engage with the students, help brainstorm ways to expand on their ideas, and consider how you might collaborate with them. So Laura, I'm going to hand it to you. And when you're done, we'll just go to our next speaker, Arden.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Buckley, and I am just finishing my first year as a PhD student in the Environmental Health Department. And my project idea was designed to determine the health implications of Boston University's new wind facility in South Dakota. Next slide. As I am really interested in how we can better incorporate public health into energy decision-making. For context, 2 years ago, the Boston University Board of Trustees approved the university's Climate Action Plan, which included a plan for BU to invest in renewable energy. BU Office of Sustainability took on this work, selecting to finance a new wind facility in South Dakota that will produce enough electricity to match 100% of the university's electricity needs. I actually learned about this project when Dennis Carlberg and Erica Madison from BU Sustainability presented at our Urban course this spring, and the pictures on these slides are stills from a video taken by the company building the facility that can be found on BU Sustainability's website. Next slide. BU chose to finance a facility in South Dakota in order to create a new renewable energy resource in an area of the country where the grid relies heavily on coal for energy production. And this project aims to first quantify regional changes in emissions from bringing this new facility online. Emissions from coal and fossil fuel production are responsible for thousands of excess deaths in the United States every year. So by reducing reliance on this energy source by building a wind facility, we expect reductions in a variety of poor health outcomes, including many cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. So using available models, this project will then translate the changes in emissions resulting from this facility into related health impacts. And this methodology will also be used to determine how these downstream health benefits would change had the project been sited elsewhere, for instance, closer to campus in New England. So the overall goal is to support BU, and I wanted to add a quick note of thanks to BU Sustainability for their work facilitating the BU Wind project with information on the health implications of this wind facility and to refine a methodology that could be used by energy decision makers more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So hi, everyone. My name is Arden Radford. I am also a first-year PhD student and a first-year trainee in the urban program. I'm at the Department of Earth and Environment in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And I'll be taking a brief moment here to talk about my proposed research project, which is modeling regional air quality and health impacts of proposed transportation emission reductions in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic United States. Next, please. So the question is, how will TCI impact air quality? So to unpack this a bit, TCI stands for the Transportation and Climate Initiative of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states. This is a coalition of 12 states in Washington, D.C., aiming to reduce vehicle emissions, develop a clean energy economy in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. This will be done by primarily improving freight vehicle efficiency and facilitating the adoption of alternative fuel vehicles and also cleaner and more efficient vehicles as well. By following these steps, the goal is to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And another positive co-benefit is a reduction of other harmful pollutants that come from fossil fuel combustion, as Laura just previously explained awesomely. So our question now becomes is, how impactful will these proposed regulations be to improving air quality and urban health? Next, please. So I have this animation here. Yes, perfect, it works. So what this is showing is a graph that shows Northeast Mid-Atlantic. This is in that white box right there. Darker colors show a higher atmospheric concentration of NO2, which is a pollutant that is emitted during fossil fuel combustion, especially from cars. That very dark kind of blob is basically where New York City is in the middle, but you can see other urban areas tend to have higher concentrations. And what this is comparing is concentrations in the atmosphere from March of this year and March of last year. You can see there's a drastic reduction in March of this year, and this is because of COVID-19 likely. So we, in my study, are hoping to compare our modeled future emissions to current observed reduced traffic and emission data due to the COVID-19 crisis. And by using this, we're hoping to give insight into the scope of possible achievements and benefits TCI will have on atmospheric quality and urban health. And we are hoping to partner with cities in the greater Boston area and eventually expanding to bring our modeling and analysis to other areas and cities that will be affected in this Mid-Atlantic and Northeast region. Thank you. Next, yeah.
Awesome, thanks Arden. Hi, my name is Jenna Rindy. I am a PhD student in the biology department, researching the effects of green space structure on urban tree health and human exposure to particle air pollution. In my research, green space structure is defined by outdoor spaces, either with trees or with no trees. My research focuses on investigating how air pollution interacts with urban trees. So on the next slide, as you can see, urban forests are fragmented like the one you see in the picture on the left. This leaves trees along the edge of the forest exposed to urban pollutants from roadways that you can see in that photo. These pollutants can be deposited onto tree leaves, as you see in the picture on the right on the next slide. This is a photo I took that shows particulate matter pollution that has been deposited onto a leaf. So all the little circular things that you see in that photo are particulate matter. Particulate matter mainly comes from the combustion of fossil fuels, like in car emissions. So it's important to find ways to remove particulate matter from the air because, as you can see displayed in the bottom picture on the next slide, these emissions can negatively affect human health, mostly by causing pulmonary diseases, but also cardiovascular diseases as well. However, particulate matter might also be detrimental to the health of trees, as it can have negative effects on the leaves. So due to these combined effects, my project looks at how particulate matter damages leaves and how people living near to green spaces with trees can benefit from increased air quality compared to people living nearer to green spaces without trees. My work will take place along a urban to rural gradient to compare forests across Massachusetts. And I'm working alongside the Arnold Arboretum to investigate this research and with other nonprofits like Speak for the Trees Boston. All my results will not only have implications for the health of constituents of Boston, but also for those living in other cities and for the damage trees can sustain from pollution. And that is all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenna. Hi, everyone. My name is Yasmin, and I'm a second-year PhD student in BU's Earth and Environment Department. My proposed work looks at Boston's urban heat island and its impacts to heat exposure and electricity consumption under future climate change. So let me pick this apart for you. Next slide, Evan. Thank you. We know that exposure to prolonged or intense periods of heat can have important public health impacts. And we also know that higher temperatures increase electricity demand for cooling and decrease electricity demand for heating. The urban heat island describes a phenomenon where cities are typically hotter than their rural counterparts due to a number of factors that impact the urban surface energy balance. So this figure here depicts the surface urban heat island for the greater Boston area, where blue indicates lower temperatures and red indicates higher temperatures. And as you can see, the red shaded area, which loosely corresponds to Boston's urban core, is much hotter than the surrounding area. Next slide, please, Evan. So, given the anticipated increases in the frequency and intensity of extreme temperatures due to climate change, it is essential for municipal leaders in both the planning, infrastructure, and public health domains to understand what the impacts of this warming will be on the urban population's exposure, as well as the demand for electricity. So my project proposes to quantify Boston's urban heat island and then statistically estimate its effect on electricity consumption. That's stage one. In stage two, I will use downscaled future temperature projections to quantify the future intensity, the heat exposures for the urban population, and then the resulting impacts to energy demand. And the hope is to be able to partner with relevant city planning and public health departments, who are admittedly a bit busy at the moment, but I look forward to having those conversations in the future. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Smith. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Department of Earth and Environment. And the title of my project proposal is Climate Change Impacts on the Cooling Potential of Urban Vegetation. Next slide, please. The urbanization process alters local climates, particularly in the form of the urban heat island effect, which produces warmer temperatures near city centers than the background rural climate. These sometimes excessively high temperatures exacerbated by the urban environment represent an important risk factor for human health, can induce vegetation stress, and increase electricity demand. The scientific consensus is that the daytime urban heat island intensity is mostly controlled by variations in the capacity of urban versus rural environments to evaporate water, pointing to municipal greening initiatives as potential pathways for urban heat mitigation. When vegetation open their stomata to photosynthesize, they simultaneously release water vapor to the atmosphere, cooling the local environment through fluxes of latent heat, as demonstrated in the diagram. It is commonly observed that vegetation growth is accelerated in urban areas, suggesting that pound for pound, urban vegetation may actually have a higher cooling efficiency than rural vegetation. However, there's likely a temperature or dryness threshold at which evaporative cooling subsides or ceases. Next slide, please. In this project, I will combine future climate scenarios with a high-resolution model of urban latent heat flux, with example outputs in Boston shown on the slide, to investigate the impact of projected changes in climate that may be further intensified by the influences of urban structure on the cooling potential of vegetation in Boston. This research will quantify the extent to which the cooling potential of vegetation persists under extreme climatological conditions, and in partnership with groups such as Boston University or the City of Boston, this project will provide a spatially explicit evaluation of the feasibility of urban greening initiatives as a climate change mitigation strategy. Thank you.
Hello again. Just to reintroduce myself, my name is Anita Tendler. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Department of Earth and Environment, and my research proposal focuses on determining the influential factors of electric vehicle and solar panel purchases. So technology change is a key component of energy transitions, and the two most disruptive technologies in the clean energy economy are electric vehicles and solar panels. Prior analyses of the transition to clean energy have focused on the economic and technical attributes of individual technologies like electric vehicles and solar panels. A causal relation between electric vehicle and solar panel purchases in Massachusetts has been established, which is likely due to the neighborhood effect, in which if you own an electric vehicle and your neighbor owns a solar panel, you're more likely to purchase solar panels, and vice versa with solar panels and electric vehicles. While other studies have attempted to identify the socio-demographic factors that influence technology adoption, these studies have failed to capture the spatial and temporal nuances in these data. Next slide. Therefore, for my research, I'm hoping to establish whether a causal relation exists between electric vehicle and solar panel purchases in New York. Further, using spatially explicit econometric techniques, I will identify what socio-demographic factors like race or median income and other influential factors like distance to nearest electric vehicle charging station are affecting this causal relation in New York and Massachusetts. This analysis will be done on a zip code level along an urban to rural gradient, so therefore partners in both local and regional municipalities can scale this research to their desired boundary to identify sensitive insertion points for policies to encourage the adoption of electric vehicles and solar panels.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Wright and I'm a third-year PhD student in the Department of Earth and Environment and a first-year trainee in the BU Urban program. Thank you for joining me today for my presentation entitled Natural Gas Leakage and Street Tree Mortality in Municipalities of Massachusetts. Next slide. My research at BU has broadly looked at the elements of infrastructure in urban areas and how the different features of infrastructure, both above and below the street, interact with each other. One example of this interaction that I've been studying closely is how gas leaks from aging natural gas distribution infrastructure interact with and can damage street trees. As methane from a gas leak infiltrates a street tree pit, it can choke the tree for oxygen, leading to tree damage or even tree death. For this project, I'm working to complete a spatial analysis on the proximity of dead and dying street trees to the location of reported gas leaks in two Massachusetts towns, Chelsea and Watertown. The goal of this project is to create a planting priority tool to help the municipalities prioritize gas leak repair with the benefit of street trees in mind. Next slide. For this project, I'm utilizing a variety of data sets that are publicly available, including street tree inventories for the two towns completed by the nonprofits Green Roots Chelsea and Watertown Teens for Trees. I'm using reported gas leak locations from the gas utility company National Grid, and I'm using street markings on the roads from utilities to gather information on the type of distribution material that's under the street. You can see that at the bottom picture there on the right. Next slide, please. I hope in the end that this project will help municipalities not only build, but also protect their urban canopies and avoid the loss of resources from planting a new tree in a pit where it is likely to die due to methane exposure. Now I'll pass it back to Pam.
Wonderful. Thank you to all of our wonderful trainee speakers. We put all of our acknowledgements together on this one slide. We just want to thank our partners who've been very helpful in developing these project ideas. But now we turn it to all of you. So Evan, if you could turn off the sharing of slides for a moment, that'd be great. Thank you. So we have time for some questions, and we have been assembling them in the chat box. So I'm going to call out some of the trainees with wonderful questions we've gotten from our audience. Let's see here. So Kathleen mentions to Arden, and I assume is that Kathy Fallon-Lambert. Great project, I agree. If you've not heard about it, you might be interested in, is it TREC, study focused on TCI? Are you familiar with this, Arden?
I am not that familiar with this, so I will definitely be reaching out to Kathleen and getting some more information on that as well. And I think John too, with information about the applications of TCI.
Wonderful. Connections.
Very excited.
Excellent. Richard Premack asks Laura, Laura, in addition to building facilities far away, could VU reduce its carbon footprint by dramatically reducing its energy consumption in Boston?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think my project focuses on one very specific part of VU's response, and there's a wealth of information and actions that are being taken to reduce electricity consumption on campus. But my project just happened to focus on this one particular piece of the response. So.
Great, but that could be a potential next step, or another student could join in collaboration, which would be great. Richard also asked another question to Jenna. Are you considering using the pandemic lockdown and reduced traffic flow to investigate air pollution in your system?
Yes, we are, as long as we can get samples out. We're considering collecting leaf samples in August-ish and comparing them from this year to next year.
Wonderful. Raquel asks Arden, are you considering including other pollutants in your model in addition to NO2 or expanding to other regions of the world?
So answer in two parts. With the discussion of other pollutants, the answer is yes. We're hoping to do this in a kind of a geochemical model. So we'll be able to adjust, hopefully, inventories for emissions to reflect the reductions. So in that, we'll be able to get other sorts of air quality precursors. So NO2, SO2, particulate matter, and anything else will be hopefully reactive to that. To expanding to other regions, I guess it comes down to the availability I can get on traffic data. And since the goal of the study was to look at the effects of proposed reductions, I could do some research into further other kind of regional long-range transport plans. So I hope that answers your question.
Wonderful, thumbs up, thank you. Lisa Tornatore, sorry, I can't speak today. Tornatore from our office, our BU Office of Sustainability, has a question for Laura. Because the BU Wind Project site location is in a relatively rural location, do you expect the health benefits would be minimal, or would a broader health impacts across the US be improved due to less coal-produced electricity?
That's a great question and something that I've thought about a lot. I think we would have to take more of a regional focus in terms of this study, but there has been a mounting research and different methodologies used in these more rural areas to kind of get a more precise look at health impacts. And while they might not be kind of massive comparing to kind of national numbers, I think that there is kind of a story to tell there, and something that I'm working through with different methodologies. So would love to hear ideas about how to address it more fully. So.
Wonderful. And Laura, thank you for passing that great baton, because I really want to invite everyone who's on this call today to reach out to us. If you have ideas to expand these projects, how you might be involved, we welcome your participation.